I'm from the distribution side design services at Hydro One. I've been with Hydro One for 26 years, really doing designing and estimating. I'm currently a manager in special projects. I have 4 different kind of streams, but the 2 that are kind of relevant to this group is managing the AUD business lead and the training side, and also dealing with the contractor design review. Brian joined, which I'm so glad, because he's the technical guy. I'm not the technical girl, so I'm gonna.
For sure. I think I've met a lot of you folks in previous years. This is my 3rd year at PUG. In the previous 2 years, I gave presentations and a little Hydro One story around our project. I was part of design services, so a designer for 15 years. And our implementation project, we kicked off in 2020, right at the height of the pandemic. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I went through that for 3 years and got this thing across the finish line, and currently staying with it. So I support and maintain the AUD configuration, and also support the EAM and GIS sides.
People are having a hard time hearing it.
Oh, okay. We need like a feedback monitor up here sort of thing. Okay. We'll speak a little closer to the mic.
Okay, so our presentation today is really just focusing on the business side. So at 15 months since go live, what our productivity looks like or has looked like over the last 15 months, how we're trying to measure the quality of work, not just the quantity. Some of the lessons learned from the business side on the go live and implementation, what our business support model looks like, and as we kind of broached the topic yesterday, Hydro One, we're new to contracting of design work, and we're also newer to AUD, so trying to get those 2 working together is a bit of a challenge currently. So just a brief overview of Hydro One. We're from Canada. We're the main utility in Ontario. We have about 1.5 million distribution customers, and we don't deal with generation, but anything from the transformer stations down, that's Hydro One. So we went live in May, on May 23rd of 2023, and this is kind of our productivity of the number of designs we got approved in AUD since go live. I honestly, when I pulled this graph, I was expecting a different picture that maybe looked like always on the upward slope. So when I saw this, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to put some more thought into how this happened. So when we went live in June, we were cherry picking the easiest designs that we could to get designs going. We had a massive backlog of designs, and we have a 60-day offer to connect requirement with the Ontario Energy Board. So we basically had to do like a cold stop on our existing design model to do a cutover to the new design model, so we couldn't do any new designs, and we had this massive backlog and an unbelievable amount of demand coming in. And then to kind of explain the dip over the winter months, our demand season for customer connections and upgrades is really heavy in the summer, but over the winter, we got snow, we don't have as much building going on, lots of vacation. We have a trainee program, so we do lots of core training with our ADETs, we call them ADETs, Area Distribution Engineering Technicians. So it's like a designer, but we do a lot of field work too. And we also have been contracting. So most of this is like demand work, not so much project work at the time. Did you have anything you want to talk about productivity?
Productivity, no.
Not so much? Okay. So then came the question, what is the quality of the designs? Because the whole reason for going to AUD was consistency in both our designing and costing. So we looked at ways to try and decide how are these designs being done with quality in mind. And the one thing we found was our validations just straight up turned off, and people just using this tool as a drawing tool like AutoCAD, and they're just putting in what they want. Because for us, because costing is embedded and labor and all of that kind of thing, If validations are turned off, then material's not getting ordered, labor's not being accumulated, and we're not getting correct costing. So in order to try and target these issues, we're doing in-person training sessions every month, trying to get like a hard line on we will not be approving designs without validations turned on. And we're trying to gain some consistency on that. It's definitely a bit of a battle. In Hydro One, every single design that's done by a designer must be approved by a supervisor. So the supervisor is kind of where the buck stops. The supervisor no longer approving designs with validations turned off.
Maybe I'll jump in just for a second. So just for the AUD users or admin in the crowd, validations in this term means auto-resolve, turned off. It means rules are disabled, things like that. One of the things that we fought really hard for, as Nicole mentioned, we're trying to drive consistency. We have really robust and really complex business rules. So we found towards the end of our project, we had to sort of give a little on that. Instead of having things auto-resolve all the time and be locked, we did have to allow some flexibility for the designers to turn things off, to allow for things like non-standard design, to allow for, you know, those little things that always pop up in design where you don't want a hard stop. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that in a lot of cases, designers are using that to their advantage to just kind of ram things through. So currently looking for ways to find the happy medium between allowing flexibility in design, but also still driving that consistency, right? And as Nicole mentioned, that dashboard is something that we're looking to do, just harvesting some metrics from AUD. We've got set up with a SQL extract that goes into a database that we can then pull information from, working on setting up some dashboards just to get a better idea of how often this is happening, maybe some of the key users that are doing this so we can target the individuals and, you know, have a little conversation with them. So just a bit of background on that.
The one slide I could pull that talks a little bit to quality was the amount of times we return a design to a designer. So in our internal world, like I said, the supervisors approve every design. And if the design is not right, then they can return that design to the designer. The caveat to that is that some supervisors make edits on behalf of the designers. If it's a small change, no big deal, but if it's a big change, they're just kind of enabling the issue, right? They're fixing it, and then every time they're still gonna get a design with that same problem because no one's learning. The other thing that might affect this is we've been hiring a lot of new employees. So obviously newer employees, less experience, probably more return designs. And sometimes designs are returned for issues that have really nothing to do with AUD. So like we said, our costing is like rammed into AUD, and we also have this kind of unique, I think it's pretty unique, obligations. So on every design, there's like a list of obligations of things that need to accompany that design, because when we talk about designs at Hydro One, we're really talking about a work package, because when the designer is done with it and the supervisor approves it, it's ready to go to the lines department to build. So those obligations can include taking easements, they can include road approvals, species at risk, water crossings, rail crossings, like joint use, locate forms, composite pole forms, like all of those things that you need to do to create a work package are kind of tracked through AUD. So we don't approve a design until we have a complete work package. So sometimes those designs might get returned by the supervisor to the tech because they haven't completed a road approval or they haven't attached a form into OpenText.
Pat was instrumental in our project, and despite his best advice, we still decided to cram a lot of extra things and have AUD do things that it really wasn't intended to do. We've made it work, surprisingly. It is flexible, robust, it does a good job, but where we find some of the pain points for us is just in the integrations. For anybody that heard me talk last year, I went into some more details around how our solution looks, just how integrated it is. We interface with SAP through the EAM module. We interface with our ArcGIS, as Enterprise GIS on the GIS side, and we run through MuleSoft for our integrations. So there's a lot of, I don't want to call them weak points, but there's a lot of points where things can get bunched up, and we find that happens a lot through the life cycle of a design. And a lot of times that's why the designers are having their designs returned, right? They get a pause. Something fails in the integration over to SAP with those obligations that Nicole mentioned. Those are all notification tasks that come over from SAP. They're just displayed in AUD through the EAM module, and it allows the user to interact with them, right? AUD doesn't house them, doesn't control them. It just kind of makes a status update back to SAP. So the integrations are plentiful, and they're definitely a challenge, but the costing is the big one too. We don't have cost per se in there, but we have a lot of cost modifiers. So things like, you know, how close is a pole to the roadway? That will influence the cost on a CU, for instance. Is it set in rock or swamp or solid earth, you know, that sort of thing? Those are all cost modifiers. And then we've done this slippery slope of these contestabilities that anybody who's heard me talk before knows that I'm a big fan of contestabilities, but we're obligated to do it. It's really essentially who is building or who is paying for the material and who is constructing it. It's a combination of two, but it's one pick. So a challenge, shout out to Sarah, who did a lot of work on our project at developing what we affectionately call the contestability engine, which is a series of, I don't know, 7 dozen tables, lookup tables and rules to make it work. So it actually works really well. I don't want to say it's perfect. We were chatting earlier, maybe 98%, and we're still fixing little tweaks that we may have missed during the project or something new that's come along since. And we're able to fix those and kind of keep them moving. But those are the types of things that I think we're seeing a lot of when the designs are returned.
I like Pat's opening yesterday when he said going forward, instead of like letting you pick your burger, they're going to suggest what kind of burger you should have, because I think we definitely made our own burger. Now we'll just switch gears into a little bit of lessons learned. So this is a little bit of our timeline for our go live. So starting March 27th of 2023, we were running train the trainer sessions for all of our AUD trainers. And then between April and May of 2023, we did 1 week of end user training for everyone across the province, running about 7 sessions concurrently over 5 weeks. In the interim, we're still like using our regular old design tool while we're learning AUD. So starting on May 8th, no new designs were allowed to be scheduled. So we're starting like our backlog there. And even leading up to that, you don't want to start any big project because there was no way to transition any of our old designs into our new design tool. And then May 11th at noon, that was kind of lights go out. All designs needed to be approved by that day, not just designed, but approved by the approver. And then no designs were being done after that. So the other issue you could think of is that like the first people that went through AUD training in April, and now we're going live the end of May. So I kind of have a bit of a philosophy on if you don't use it, you lose it. So I think that was challenging for the people who were in the earliest sessions. I luckily was in the last session that went through, so it was a little bit fresh still. So we went live May 2023, and then June through August, we were in hypercare, and we were delivering some post-go-live training modules. And then in September, we moved into sustainment with just our power user support. So some of the insights on this, over 2 weeks with not touching any new incoming work. None of our designs could be transitioned into AUD. They were either needing to be completely redrawn in AUD or just like started over. There was a lot of project delays. I think we were, how far off of our original go live?
18 months?
18 months from our original planned go live date. So a lot of the momentum we had at the beginning of the project with change support and like monthly kind of updates to the users, they kind of lost their steam. I think people were starting to feel like this is never going to happen. And again, we were kind of through COVID on this project too, so there was a lot of like not in person. I think one of our first sessions where we were supposed to do training got canceled like the Friday before training because there was like a COVID outbreak and all of a sudden people couldn't come together. So we also did, even though we were 18 months behind, we did go live with some defects. One of them was we couldn't do multi-circuit design the day we went live. We didn't have that figured out yet, but our plan was to focus on demand when we went live and not focus on big project work. We went live during our peak demand season. At the bottom of the slide, you can kind of see our increasing volume of connections. From September 2022 to 2023, we had a 38% increase in customer demand requests for new connections. So not only is it our usual peak, but now we're seeing a 38% increase. And we're also going live worrying about productivity versus training. So we had this plan to do all this post-go live training, but oh my God, we're so far behind. What takes priority? I think everybody knows. So our original training plan, we had Enable Now self-directed training. I don't know, does everyone know what Enable Now is? It's kind of like a little, I don't know, kind of click-through presentation, and then the user can do it themselves. So they actually have to like move the mouse, click here to get to the next step. So you're not live in a training environment, but it's probably as close as you can get. So we did deliver those over the months leading up to go live. And then the original plan was to do 2 weeks of end user training before cutover. So that didn't happen. What actually happened was the Enable Now training and then a 1-week training pre-cutover, and then we are going to do all these post-go-live modules to focus on specific workflows and types. So the end-user training focused a lot on GIS cleanup and how to do a new connection or an upgrade, but we didn't talk about things that were more project-related, multi-circuit related, sub-cable related, like any of those kind of more complex ideas. We didn't touch on them at all in training, and the plan was to do that post-go-live. So the reality was the post-go-live training, not overly consistent. We had a large backlog of work, and everyone had competing priorities. Do I attend this online Teams training or go to a local training session, or do I do these multiple, hundreds of designs that we're backlogged on? Customers are screaming for connections. And as I mentioned, we did have a lot of go-live defects that were still outstanding. So currently, our focus, after 15 months, we're revamping our go-live training material with up-to-date experience. We've learned a lot of ways to do things faster and better, and we're creating new training where some gaps are existing. We're also developing some targeted training for key concepts where users are struggling, and we're delivering these in local safety meetings across the province. Safety meet in the morning, in the afternoon. I would say like maybe a maximum, biggest op center probably has like 15 techs. So we're delivering those small group sessions, and we're tracking the attendance to make sure that everyone's attending to try and get consistency on our training content. Okay, so GIS, our biggest miss. I don't know if it was entirely understood at the time, the impact that we call it GIS cleanup. And it's not just like aligning all the poles in a row to make sure that AUD knows that it's a straight line or what the angle is, but also doing all those connections. I'm gonna let Brian talk to the actual GIS part because I'm not the tech person.
Right. So as Nicole mentioned, and I've said this often, if I could build a time machine and go back 5 years, I would have a lot of things to say to myself and hopefully be able to influence. But one of the biggest takeaways we had of our project was that we really didn't give the GIS component of our implementation the time and effort it deserved. We were focused more on higher priority things, which are customer facing, right? So customer contracts, making sure that costing, estimation was done properly, material ordering. So we put a lot of emphasis on that. Didn't put as much on GIS. So in the 15 months since go live, what we've seen is a real pain point with the GIS system. And it makes a big difference for us because that's how an AUD design starts. It's reliant on good quality data. For AUD to do what it does best, it needs that starting point. And that's where we're struggling to get our good quality data. Admittedly, our GIS system is old. It's an old version of Esri Enterprise, and it doesn't have the same level of detail that AUD has. I've talked briefly on this in previous presentations, but essentially the data model isn't as detailed. So a lot of the things that we look in AUD to harvest information on, whether it's pole heads, connected voltage, all of those attributes, all of that data that would be really nice to have to do design work, brownfield design work especially, just doesn't exist in our GIS system. So we had some debates. Do we try to spin up a mini project, find some funding to bring the GIS system up to date? There's been a lot of talk that our GIS system is undergoing an upgrade because it is quite old. So there's been a lot of back and forth on how to make that system work. But really that's the root of our problem, is having that quality data. So not necessarily AUD's problem, but it becomes that because we don't have the data to base it on. So what we're finding is a lot of designers are stuck in the quicksand of having to do GIS cleanup. In order to do what we've asked them to do in AUD, leave all of the resolved behavior on, let AUD do its rules and its calculations, auto-generate materials. If we don't have the existing poles and the existing conductor connected to the pole heads in the right sequence, we don't have the right equipment, the right leveling, those things just don't happen. They're presented with errors, or they're presented with an unexpected path where the design just doesn't flow. And unfortunately, that's a lot of my day now, is handling individual complaints through our ticketing system, support system, on how do we fix this. And this is how we're continuing to find defects, right? In some cases, we find that it's the bad GIS data. So we're working on ways to address that. We actually have an upcoming release plan where we're addressing a lot of that, just cleaning up some of the rules that Paul helped us set up back in the day around GIS import on Model Mapper side. And then also too, just some more training, having the users take a little bit more effort in doing their pole head connecting, making sure that the conductor training is proper, and just taking a little bit more ownership. I think a lot of our users, we maybe oversold it to our users, saying, the A in automated, everything's going to be automated. It's literally just a click, click, click. It's not quite that easy. So we're having to kind of recircle back to the users to say, we do need you to put a little bit more effort into it, make sure that your design is set up. So that's one thing. I wish we could move to utility network, because that would be like the answer to all of my prayers. I'm still working on trying to get that off the ground, but we'll see. So right now we're still Esri, and the GIS cleanup is a big problem for us.
Okay, so the result of this is just designers turning off validations and using AUD to create a picture and doing their own calculations and calling in their own standards. GIS cleanup and connections, it's time consuming, but I feel like we have some really fast users, so I think it's just a matter of practice makes perfect. The more often you do it, the better you get at it. Because turning off the validations, again, it prevents calculations, material, costing, work location callouts, none of our rules fire, and it completely defeats the goal of having consistent designs and costing across the province. The next learning point was training environment. It's a current issue. So we don't have a training environment anymore. We had an environment when we went live, but after maybe 5 months, I think it was repurposed, not kept up to date. So currently we're using production. I think that's probably an industry no-no, using your production environment as a training environment. It affects all of our reporting because we can't exclude any of the training designs that we're doing. It's also an administrative nightmare. We have to have someone set us up work orders in there specifically when we're doing training. And sometimes those designs aren't closed in a timely fashion. And it could, you could run the risk of accidentally sending somebody a contract for a design if we kind of say don't go past this point in the process, or else it kind of turns into a construction work order, goes out to the customer. So the issues, I guess, with creating a training environment, I don't know if you want to talk to all the things that need to go in there.
Yeah, and so just to go back to that concept of our fully integrated solution, this whole concept of a training environment really isn't applicable to AUD. I mean, AUD is essentially environment agnostic, right? You can point it to a certain environment if you need the endpoints to go somewhere. If you're a completely standalone utility, environment is not really an issue, right? Especially if it's client-based. For ours is client-based, so each client machine has its install of AUD, and it's pointed to an environment. And that environment just means an instance of SAP, so that we can talk back and forth, get that data from SAP. It's pointed to an instance of GIS. The MuleSoft transitions, we have another element called a design container, where a lot of intermediary data goes from our GIS for our as-builts, for our playback, and for an online web service that we use. So all of those environments have to be set up, maintained, configured, kept up to date. And that's the challenge that we're having with this training environment. What we actually used for training during the project was what we called Project QA environment, which was set up specifically for our project by our ISD department. Worked great. It was kept current. It was fresh, data was abundant, and we could use it as much as we wanted. Unfortunately, when our project wound down, that environment then got repurposed for the next tech project that was in the pipelines. So, the business lost the ability to have a readily accessible, non-production environment, sort of a sandbox environment that they could do design work and things like that. Unfortunately, because our system, the focal point is AUD. That's the main piece of software that all the designers use, and they interact with all of the supporting systems through AUD. It makes it challenging. So trying to set up designs in production to do training, scary, but we're between a rock and a hard place, and so there's things that we can do there. What we've also done is recommended using sort of an offline mode, so you can practice design work inside AUD in that disconnected state. You're not interfacing with the systems, not sending materials over to SAP. You're not sending the GIS components over to get played back, but you can still learn and train the core functionality of AUD with less risk. So, I mean, that's one thing that we're looking to do too. But it is something that it takes money. In any business, obviously, it takes money, it takes effort, and it takes, the right combination of factors to get a dedicated environment set up. And I know Nicole's been doing a lot of work on trying to make that happen for us long term. And the biggest pitch is make it a shared environment. We realize that, for the designers, we're just one small part of the company, so it's unlikely that we would get a full environment just for ourselves, but hey, we're willing to share, so set it up and we can each take turns running through the environment. That's just our thought, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about our business support model since go live. So we have a sustainment department, which is where Brian lives, and then we have the business side at Design Services. So Brian deals with configuration, AUD and SAP, costing and stuff happens in sustainment. They triage, they do break-fix tickets, they manage the health of our servers, outages, interfaces, and they work on our future proactive enhancements. On the Design Services side, in my group in special projects, we support the line of business end users. We have power user support. We create and kind of, I guess, deliver training. We create and maintain the training material. Similar to the other groups that presented yesterday, we have communication out to our end users. We have a design services hub, we call it, where we store different types of training and information for people. We also publish a weekly kind of newsletter called the Monday Minute, and it just gives users updates or nice to know tips and tricks, kind of based on what we're seeing and maybe errors and different things to bring their attention to. And we help prioritize the configuration that Brian's group does based on business needs. So our power user network, we have 340-ish internal designers in distribution that use AUD, and we have approximately 63 individual contractors from 3 different companies using AUD currently. We have 23 power users across the province and in our contracting group. Those power users are regular designers across the province. And then we have an AUD lead. So I put the dates here just to kind of show you that it wasn't until June of this year that we determined or got approval to get an AUD lead. So they don't report to him, but the AUD lead is the one that's developing and updating the training content. He leads train the trainers for those power users. And he deals with the issues that those power users can't resolve for their local. And then he kind of goes across into Brian's group. If he also can't fix it, then he's working with sustainment, raising tickets, and that kind of stuff. And above the AUD lead, we have a manager of new technology and innovation, and that's just within design services. So any big IT type projects that affect design services, they come through our group this way.
Could I just jump in
You
real
bet.
quick? I just wanted to mention the concept of this AUD lead was important for us. So as I mentioned, I'm on that support side, so I handle a lot of the technical tickets as they come in, the actual break fixes, or hey, my pole head's not connecting properly, I'm getting an error, communicating with SAP, whatever the case, right? What we were finding was that a high volume of tickets were coming in where more things like, I don't know how to do this. Or your training was garbage and I need some help, which is great, but our group wasn't set up. That wasn't really part of our roles. And we found that we were spending a lot more time holding the hands of the users, which is okay, someone has to do it, but it was taking us away from doing actual technical fixes or working on enhancements. So it was kind of our recommendation in coordination with Nicole and Nicole's colleagues. We put this forward, put a business case together and said, can we get somebody like this AUD lead that can work alongside us where we get tickets that are clearly user help issues and we can just pass those tickets right over to the AUD lead. They can take that. It makes sense because then they can monitor and flow that back into training, right? Some follow-up training. If they're seeing a pattern on certain topics coming through from users that don't understand a particular function or they don't understand a particular workflow, then the AUD lead, whose responsibility it is to maintain training, can circle back and have some sort of sweep behind or some targeted training sessions, that sort of thing. So it's been a big help. It's only been since June, but it's been a big help from our perspective just to kind of keep everyone in their lanes and let us focus on sort of the more technical end of things.
And that's also where we get a lot of our ideas for the Monday Minutes and different things that we put on our hub is from the sustainment group giving us feedback of what they're seeing. I did notice this is kind of unique from the presentations I saw yesterday, that in the line of business we're supporting the training and all of that kind of stuff. I think yesterday I saw maybe in technical services and that kind of stuff, that's where the support and training was happening. I think it's kind of unique in Hydro One too, because in the sustainment group, there's other IT projects that have happened, and the sustainment group does do the training and the support. So this one is kind of unique that it's with the line of business. But I think it's good. It keeps everyone very current and keeps our finger kind of on the pulse of what's going on out there. So this is a map of the province. And you can kind of see how spread out our power users are. So every ops center has its own kind of little puzzle piece. And we have field managers in design services, and they cover 2 to 3 operation centers geographically, and we try to have 1 power user per field manager in design services, so that's kind of how we came up with that many. We also have a subdivision group, which is separate. Their workflows are a little separate. They have their own power user. And then we have 2 power users in our contracting group. They're also like supervisors that approve contractor designs, but they support that. And contracting is fairly new, so we're working on setting up their own kind of power user network within each company so that they have 1 great user in AUD. We'll train them, but then they have 1 power user. So all the issues come up through that person and then across to our power users so that we're enabling them to get better and stop the flood of like the easy button of maybe just calling our power user, and then their power user can help train their employees on the issues that they're seeing with multiple designers. So our power users provide local support. They roll out configuration bundles that are released from sustainment, and they roll out enhancements to the tool and any kind of training. And our AUD lead in my group, we hold 1 mandatory touchpoint call for approximately 30 minutes for our power users. So like every Tuesday at 8 a.m., they hold a call on Teams. And it helps us keep a pulse on what's going on in our 52 op centers across the province. And it gives us an opportunity to communicate any critical updates that are going on. Or like sometimes we're finding out about, we start at 7 a.m. and sometimes the power users are on already saying, oh, there's an issue, something's down, something's failed, can't get logged in. So it really helps us keep a pulse on what's going on. We do have a second optional call later on in the week on Thursdays, and power users can log in if they want, share any ongoing issues in their op centers, and request support. So similar to yesterday, that whole notebook idea, totally taking that back, because this would be an excellent something to go along with it, because the power users, they have a Teams chat, and I couldn't even guess how massive that chat is, because anytime they have users ask them questions, they try and answer it. If they can't answer it, they pop into their Teams chat, they put the message in there, and any power user will respond with, you know, a link to something or an answer, and it creates a lot of great conversation and answers. But then the issue is that it's like lost in this massive Teams chat with a ton of people in there. So the idea of taking that to a notebook would also be great for onboarding new power users, because when people move on to different jobs, it's like, oh, we need a new power user. And it's like, what's the power user training look like? And we're like, you're just a really good user. And they're like, well, what do I reference? What do I need to know that's better than what I know now? And it's like, well, we'll give you access to the chat. So I think that that notebook could be a very powerful tool. The power users are surprisingly engaged. They're all pumped about using AUD. They're amazing users. They just want people to get better. Sometimes it's difficult because they're not supervisors. So they see a lot of users, you know, turning off all those validations, and it frustrates them because they are trying to train these people how to do their job, but they can't enforce it because they're not the supervisors. So it's definitely something that we're working on. This year, we held our first annual Power User Conference in June. So we brought all those power users from across the province together for 2 days. We shared the latest and greatest information on future enhancements and configurations that were coming down the pipe. They had face-to-face interaction with our sustainment group, our IT group, our GIS group. We held workshops to gather what their pain points are in the field and to gather their feedback. And that helped develop topics and priorities for our training for the next year. So we've already started developing training. We already gave the GIS training for cleanup and stuff to try and assist with some of those pain points that users are having. And we also had our process department there to help refine any processes that weren't quite lining up. It gave them a real chance to network and share experience and ideas across the group. And we had some leadership there too, to help take back some of their pain points to help roll down through our management to the supervisors about these people not being supervisors and them giving best advice and help, but they can lead the horse to water, but they can't really make them drink. So it was a great perk for these power users because they're just regular designers. They're not getting any extra pay or anything for being a power user. It's just really their like investment and interest in AUD.
Can I just jump in real
You
quick?
bet.
I just wanted to share an example on that conference. So I was there. It was a great opportunity to meet the power users, which, you know, because of the size of our province, I hadn't met a lot of them before face to face. I've been with the company almost 20 years. I hadn't met them. There's a lot of new faces. So it was a good opportunity, much like PUG, to get together to meet the people, interact face to face, and just kind of work through. So I mentioned the GIS cleanup process, and that's what we're working on currently. We're slated to push it out to production. When is that? End of September, I think we're working through it. That actually spun from this power users conference. So in listening to the feedback from these power users and saying, what is really bugging you most? And that's what I heard from most people, which was good, because if I were just looking at my ticket intake system, that wasn't on my radar. Do you know what I mean? I was seeing things like high priority break fixes, like our UDH EAM is locking out randomly. We don't know why. Clearly, we need to address that. But then there was a whole host of other tickets, things, you know, my arrestor materials not ordering correctly. So this GIS thing wasn't on my radar, but according to the power users and according to all of the users in the province, this was a huge deal. So it was a great opportunity for us, and not just me, and my team as well. There are 3 of us total, myself, Andre Paquette, and Pat Desjardins. We listened to that, said, hey, listen, we can fix that. We brainstorm some ideas right then and there. We use some tips and tricks from Sarah and Paul on how to do fixes on the fly, demoed some of the things that we could do right there in the room, and then took that away, built a plan to fix it. So it was a great opportunity for us, and I really hope that Design Services does continue with this. I noticed you've got first annual, so hopefully there will be a second and third, and we'll continue on like that, because I think it's a great idea.
All right, so on to my favorite topic, contracting. So we kind of chatted about it yesterday. We're new to contracting out design work, and we're fairly new to AUD. So the current approach is that with any design-only type work, so that's work where we're contracting out the design, but we're gonna construct it internally with our crews, we're treating everything the exact same as we do with our internal designers, but remembering that we're also called ADETs, not just designers. So the plan was deploy hardware and software. So currently 63 laptops over 3 firms. We have to issue each designer an employee number, company profile, single sign-on, image these machines, GIS passwords, AutoCAD licenses, AUD licenses, SAP, design container, like the list goes on and on. We had to stand up a group, which is my group, in design services with a team of supervisors to support technical questions on design, but also to review and approve these designs, and we also have the power users in our group for that. So some of the pain points on that is it's time consuming. It's taking us a month and a half to 3 months to deploy a laptop. IT has to support and configure hardware. Brian's team has to work on all of the licensing issues on those laptops. We have some out of province and out of country VPN support issues. There was some training provided originally. I think only 3 reps from each firm attended, and I'm not even sure that they were actually end users in all cases. Trying to communicate updates and changes with contractors, we're trying to find the best way to do that. We have internal ways, but currently we only contract out large project work, large expansions. As much as we can, we try and stay away from projects that involve costing to a customer, because all of our contracts run through AUD, and costing is just a nightmare. So all the demand work we keep internally, and most of the project and program work we're dealing with contractors. Power user support is difficult. Contractor turnover is also difficult, and licensing costs. So we've definitely learned a lot yesterday about different models for doing this, and we have big plans to take some stuff back. We also deal with work assignment, IT security, and confidentiality issues. So ADET versus designer. To me, it's like a work package versus a design. So as mentioned, our version of AUD, it includes things like design and construction obligation, costing selection, joint use requirements, property right requirements, species at risk, civil contracting requirements, forestry requirements, road approval, municipal consent, work order properties. Like, these are all things that feed into the costing that is fed across to SAP. And I think most contract companies are designers, and we're ADETs. We design it, we estimate it, we go out in the field, we stake it, we deal with the costing, estimating everything. So I think it's kind of unique maybe to our company. Hopefully somebody else in the audience has a similar experience and we can chat. We're constantly asked by other managers in Hydro One, why can't we just import an AutoCAD design into AUD? And I'm not the technical guy, but my answer is always like, well, someone would have to do all this GIS cleanup first to make this work. And then who, like, okay, so now it all looks good in GIS, you import this stuff, but who would do all of the picks that are required on everything? Like, what's the soil type? What's the voltage? Like, all of those things that we consider that help drive material picks and also help drive costing. By importing an AutoCAD design, we would have to stand up like departments and departments of people to deal with the estimating, the joint use, the general contractor work that's required for digging holes, like all of that stuff that right now internally an ADET does, a designer doesn't do. So the contractors we're using, they're learning. I don't know that they're super happy about all of these things, but we're not set up any other way right now. So yeah, if there's anyone in the audience that has a similar type of utility setup, we would be very interested in talking. So as I mentioned recently, we had each firm implement their own power user. That way all AUD support will funnel up through their power user to ours and help upskill them, and they can share lessons learned within their groups to help make them the experts in AUD. That's really all I had about contracting. Like, us shipping laptops across the province and across the country, for that matter, is definitely a pain point. We definitely learned that option 4 from yesterday looked really cool. Also, the contractors having their own licenses, that's probably going to save us some headaches too. But yeah, we'll open her up to questions.
Yeah, I'd like to make one comment before the question. We talked yesterday about you can't have a IT, an AUD, and a GIS. It's really a solution workflow. You have to think that through at implementation, because Hydro One had a business side perfect training program. We go in and we say, okay, and then they say, oh, by the way, we're also changing all of SAP, because it was a complete rewrite of SAP. And they said, your training is in the development environment. We're like, excuse us? So we were trying to do a training program with an SAP that was 3 versions behind where we were on the AUD configuration, and it basically brought the training program to about a 6-week halt, where it was like, we got to go forward, guys. So they gave us one environment. So, you know, if we're going into an existing SAP or an existing Maximo, that's fine, because it's not changing. But this was moving the entire costing engine into SAP. And I don't think they understood that they were the costing engine to start with. But it was a disaster. And it's just really think the whole system through from the time you start signing the contract till the time you have to support it. It's big lesson learned from Hydro One.
And just to add to that, Pat, and I know I've said this before, but recommendation for anybody kicking off an implementation, if you haven't realized it already, is don't do it in silos. Make sure everyone talks, make sure each stream communicates. It just makes things go much easier.
Great presentation. Thank you for that. I may have missed it, but you mentioned the supervisors check the AUD designs. Can you describe in what way they perform those checks? What do they go through to do that?
Well, there's a little button that the designer pushes. I don't know, you can tell them
No,
technical.
I think are you looking for like, what is the workflow? What things does a supervisor look through, that kind of style? Or,
Scott Hubble, SRP, thank you, Pat. Yeah, like how detailed do they get, and what types of checks do they perform against the data versus visually how it looks? What kind of depth do they go through to make sure that the design is done, quote unquote, correctly?
do you want the right answer or the actual answer? The right answer, the way it's trained, the way that it was set up, and the way that we're asking people to do it, is to do a detailed analysis. So they are checking things. We have a checklist that's been set up. They're checking to make sure that resolved behavior hasn't been disabled. They're checking in the reports to see if there's been any validation errors that have been ignored. They're checking for correctness against AUD as well, right? I tell them I'm not perfect. I can make the system do a lot of things, but it's not perfect. So I'm having them check for things like our design standards, our framing standards. Are they correct? Did AUD in fact choose the right angle pole, the right guy calculations, things like that? They're checking that, and then they're checking also to all of the other stuff that we have asked AUD to do, which goes into costing. So did they put the right flat costs in there to have a general contractor come in to dig a pole hole in advance of those sorts of things, right? So it's sort of a mix of the two. They're checking the technical aspect of the drawing. One thing that I didn't mention, but it is integral to our workflow, is the GIS posting. So one step that a designer has to do is a manual publish the drawing, the design data, to our design container, which lands it there, and it's waiting there for the GIS tech to pick it up further down the work stream. But we found a lot of users weren't doing that. They were missing that step, which then takes the whole process off the rails once the GIS tech goes to pick it up. So that got added to the checklist from a supervisor's perspective. Hey, did the designer follow all the steps that are required to keep this cart on the rails and moving forward? So it's sort of a mix. So what do they actually do? A little bit of both.
So even prior to AUD, the supervisors approved every design. So we have Regulation 2204 in Ontario, which you have to build to your standard, and then you have to construct to a standard. So that's the major thing in ensuring like all those engineering standards are being used. The checking if validations are turned off and on might be a little bit like this, but starting in August, we've been like kind of drawing a hard line on validations must be turned on to ensure that, because if not, AUD that's doing all these calculations on pole classing, guy lead, all that stuff, it's not happening. So it's much easier to approve a design if we're letting AUD fire the way it's supposed to and having all those things done. And then they're checking that all those obligations, road approvals, all that stuff are attached. But I think it seems like a mountainous job. Like, oh my God, it probably takes them an hour or 2 hours, even on a small design. But as you get used to your users and you become comfortable with what they're submitting, you kind of, for your senior employees who are good users, you're approving like probably with a quick skim over. But for your newer trainees or your newer contractors, it probably takes a lot more time, and on large projects too, right? Because even constructability is an issue. Like, can lines access this pole? Have they thought through all of, the right soil conditions and voltages and all that kind of stuff, so.
So for your 23 super users, how did you identify them and get them to buy in on that role?
So most of them started out on the project as, testers or trainers, and then they kind of became the power users. But over time, as they, went to the sustainment department or they moved on in their jobs, in some areas, it's really easy because people are passionate and they're looking for a little something more than being not just a designer, but just a designer. And it would probably look good, if they're going after a future role that they've kind of put their hand up and they've really gotten involved. So in a lot of areas, it's easy. There's one area where we're really struggling to get someone interested in that. And I think with the new AUD lead and us staffing up our department to support, it's getting better because they have a voice to kind of say, hey, like I'm trying and I'm not getting support from the local supervisor, the local manager, they're always doing this. So I think that was a bit of the struggle, but yeah, it's definitely a concern. What happens if that person moves on and no one else is interested, right? And we do, we're a unionized company, so if they're actually delivering training to, I'm not sure what all the roles are, but if they're delivering training to a decent-sized group of people, they do get an instructor bonus pay, so that is a little bit of a perk for the days that they're actually doing training.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Arun with PP Electric Utilities. Thank you for the presentation. One question, I noticed you listed some of the features you use in the AUD that are customizable were the property rights, the species at risk, and the forestry requirements. Are you guys pulling in like survey data into your designs? And if you are, what's that file format?
No. It is planned for future. So one of the things that we realized during our project was that AUD can do so much. Even things like surface elevations, that whole concept of 3D. We realized it was possible, then quickly realized we didn't have time to build that all out. So we're road mapping a lot of those items, and importing data like that is one of them. I've done over the last year just some casual inquiries to see what data sources we have available to us inside our company that we're already subscribing to. And one of the things that we want to do is build some connections to those, whether they're layer files, whether they're vector package files, that sort of thing. And then how do we want to interact with them? And that kind of comes back to that business analyst topic. We would go to Nicole's group and say, here's the data that we can provide. Is it useful? How do you want to interact with it? And then we start to build that business case up on how we bring it in, right? If they only want to visualize it, we'll probably bring it in as a web map service, just a layer that you can turn on and off, and easy. But if you want to write rules against it, then we need to be able to interact with it. We'll bring it in a little differently.
We do have TerraNet data, we do have the TerraNet layer where we can see where property lines are and that kind of thing. And we do have the availability of Google Maps and the Google overlay and that kind of thing. But our techs go in the field for every design. So they're identifying, we dig up property bars with bar finders. We look at forestry, and we have forestry technicians where they provide us with a forestry cost to input into the design.
I should just qualify that. The species at risk, I just remembered you mentioned that. So it's a secure database, and our users need to pass a training course in order to access that. So it's an entirely separate FD database. It presents a lot of problems because that password expires at a different time than the typical FD password does. So we see a lot of issues that way. And that one does get imported as a custom feature in AUD so that we can interact with it, we can write rules, and we can display it as a polygon in our design or in our map. Consequently, just be careful when you're doing that because it does add a significant amount of overhead to the drawing. If there's multiple layers that you're bringing in, we've seen DWG files double in size, and after some analysis, it is a lot to do with those species at risk layers that we're bringing in. So currently looking at a different way of doing that, but all these little things we learn.
For this next question, if you're more comfortable speaking Canadian, we'll translate it later.
Dan Planninga from Fortis, Alberta. Yeah, just thank you for this presentation as well, Brian. So I have a lot of not to do things, it sounds like here. But just curious on your integration with SAP. So that's something that we're looking at right now. So what kind of information are you gathering through UDH or bringing across to AUD? I know you mentioned costing, which was kind of a little bit crazy, but in regards to work orders or customer information, what are kind of the other things that you are bringing in from SAP and vice versa?
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm happy to sit and go into full detail with you at some point, but just real high level. The CU library is the first and foremost that comes in. So all our CUs exist in SAP. They come over nightly to our UDH database, so they're updated overnight, and that's a big CU library. So all of our materials, that also houses a lot of the cost modifiers, which are kept in SAP. That was one thing we were very strict on. We didn't want to maintain separate tables. So things like joint use partners, all of the type of data set that exists in a SAP stays there. It just gets dropped off nightly to us and we pick it up from a table in the database. And then on the individual basis, the key to our workflow is work order, but we also organize it by notification in SAP. So that data will come over as line items. Customer information is there, job site address, customer mailing address, all of that. And then technical master data. So the connection type itself, what pole asset information comes from SAP, if it's an existing transformer, the existing feeder ID, that sort of information as well. So that's all incoming, and in some cases it is bidirectional. We want users to be able to update transformer information, for instance, if it's a brand new transformer and they're creating a new transformer number, be able to feed that back into SAP, so it is a bidirectional interface. Then of course there's our big one, which is the costing. So it's our interface 8. It's a beast, and that's where all the costing information flows back. So AUD builds that bill of materials. The ADAT has put all the cost modifiers on it, and then it just sends back through a massive JSON file and gets picked up by SAP, and then that's where SAP code kicks in, and it does what it needs to do with it.
So one thing, they had 3 different systems. So like a tax code table, SAP had a version, GIS had a version, and design had a version. And one would be AB, one would be Alberta, one would say, I don't know. So what big part of the project was who was the master of what data, and then shared the data. So either SAP, if you maintain tax codes, I'm going to consume it versus trying to maintain. We had a lot of those we found, a lot. You had a question?
Gentry, SD Genie. So you guys mentioned that you had a lot of live defects. So I just want kind of your guys' input, like how some of those were missed during the testing process. Did you guys have any hard stops where you had to do manual workarounds or even say this job can't be completed in AED? Then I was also interested in hearing your guys' process on doing your pull calculations in AED. What are you guys using? And yeah.
For sure. You want me to talk to that? Yep. So the defects, I mean, ideally in a project, you would go live with 0 defects, but the reality is that never happens, right? So there's always a process where you have that risk analysis meeting or series of meetings and determine what ones you can let slide and which ones you can't. So for us, there were, I don't even remember the number, but there were a lot of defects between the SAP system itself, between the GIS system, and between AUD. So we inherited a share of defects on our own. I think it was, it was probably close to 60 or 70 defects. Now, they ranged in severity, so we rate them on a severity scale, so S1 being the highest, S4 being the lowest. No S1s or S2s were accepted, so we had to fix those before we moved on. S3s and S4s were ones where there was a workaround. So it could be something like we wanted the work location call out to display the additional depth set of a pole. That was one of our ultra-specific requirements, and we just didn't get there. We didn't get that into the rule. We identified it as a defect. Is it a showstopper? No. Is it a workaround? Yep. The designer can add an M-text box and just put their own text in there. So those are the types of defects that we went live with, and that's why we're still plugging away at them, right? We've still got a list of them that we're maintaining, and as we build our bundles or our releases to push new templates into production, we'll grab a handful of them. But we also work with Nicole's group to prioritize, because since we've went live, there's been new things found, or there's been changes in our technical standards. So our engineering continues to produce new standards, new materials being added. There's new legislation coming through, or new requirements from the external contractor group, for instance. So there's only 3 of us. Our time gets divided accordingly, and we prioritize things. So that's sort of our defect process. But for us, it was a matter of identifying them and then documenting what the workaround was and making sure that design services and the training department had that available, and especially the power users made sure that they had that information available, that they could help the users understand how to work around that problem, right? And your second question was on pole classing. I could honestly spend an hour talking about it. I won't. We use, so nonlinear analysis, we entertained the thought of involving Spidacalc or OCalc, something like that. We didn't. Our engineering department has done a great job at producing tables for the ADETs to use. So historically, ADETs would use tables for pole classing, for guy calculations, for holding strengths, things like that. So we had some discussion during the project, should we abandon that method and go with, on-demand calculations, or should we continue to use the table values? In the interest of time and not upsetting the boat too much, we went with the table values. So essentially, we recreated all of those table calculations or all those table values that exist in our engineering standards books in AUD, and then had rules written to essentially do what the ADETs we're currently doing by hand on paper, long form. AUD automates that process for us. So we found a lot of pushback on it because a lot of people were used to the rule of thumb. A 45-foot class 3 pole always does the trick in this situation. But when you actually sit down and do the calculations right to the decimal point, it doesn't. And so that's been a bit of an adoption issue too. A lot of people still firmly believe. I get tickets saying AUD's wrong, so I have to walk through the calculations and show them, and so it's not. Take it up with your engineering representative or whatever you want to do, right? Yeah. Yeah, good question.
I got Ryan Sanders with Encore.
Sorry.
Okay. I got two questions. First question is GIS, your GIS, people. How is that relationship? That's something we're adopting. How is that relationship between designers and your GIS, techs? Like, is that a pretty open, or is there a lot of strife between them?
It's getting better. So I mean, pre-AUD, our project, there was virtually no communication. There was, the odd email back and forth when a design made it all the way through to the GIS technician to play back, where things didn't make sense, they needed confirmation. There wasn't really a good process. So we actually took an opportunity to, open the channel of communication a little bit more. Some of the GIS technicians that we worked with on the project that we still maintain close contact with have been absolutely fantastic in helping us understand that world more, because it's critical. It has to be, right? So with their help, we're understanding how we can make their lives easier and we can actually build better data. But the designer to the GIS tech, there really isn't a path for that communication in our world. The idea or the expectation is that the designer has set up, with the help of the system, with the help of AUD, has set up the design and the design data accurately so that by the time it reaches the GIS tech and they play it back 2 weeks or 2 months down the road, whenever it's necessary, it's ready to go. They're doing sort of a cursory review check and then playing it back.
And my second question is, you talked about some of the data from validations and things like that. How have you leveraged that data to, understand what's going on, maybe what designers you need, or are you leveraging that data in any way, I guess?
Unfortunately not. One of the things I learned, I think it was after I was here last year, is that just due to some constraints, the one dashboard that we were harvesting all that data for and dumping it into our data lake did not get built. So it was intended for another group. It was more like senior leadership level, that sort of thing, but it just did not get built. So the data is sitting there. It's just a matter of finding some really smart people other than myself, because I've got my hands full, but finding some really smart people of building those connectors up to that data lake, pulling the data, organizing it away. It's there. But yeah, unfortunately right now it's a lot of anecdotal, observation-based analysis, which is painful and time-consuming. So as Nicole mentioned, her group and senior leadership would really like to get their hands on that data, so it is on the priority list of things to get built. Yeah.
Keenan Ron, Salt River Project. First off, thank you for the suggestion last year of using the Teams channel. We've implemented that on our side, and it allows our users to talk to each other, takes the load off Bot and Hubble over here. Secondly, the question, any regrets on creating kind of the hard technical integrations between the GIS and SAP systems, as opposed to potentially doing like a process or reporting based, kind of loosely coupled, integration, quote unquote, between those systems?
I have mixed feelings, but so I mean the struggle that we see whenever you build a heavily integrated solution, there's always weak points, and there will always be weak points, right? No one system is ever strong enough to handle it, and that certainly has been a challenge for us, right? One of the things that we see, because AUD is the user front or the user focus, everyone misreports a problem as AUD. AUD crashed because of this. When we investigate, why is that? Well, it's because the connection to FD went down or their password is expired. It's not AUD's fault, we're just reporting it. And then on the SAP side, right, we had some issues with SAP tables not functioning or the ABAP code gone wrong. And we can't control that, but the error message is displayed in AUD. So I would say there are some regrets that we didn't influence the messaging. I don't think we ever really intended to fully decouple, although I would have liked to have, but we didn't ever fully decouple because of the way our systems are set up, right? We still needed to do costing, but there were two competing requirements. One was to have costing done in SAP, design work done in AUD, but another high-level requirement that was really top of the list was to limit the chair swivels for the designer. So in order to do costing and estimation, some people did not want to have the ability to do your design work in AUD, produce a package of some sort, move that package over to SAP, use some sort of an interface to do costing, move that package over to GIS. Do you know what I mean? That kind of process. So the decision was made to keep everything, essentially use AUD as that focal point and reach out to all of the other systems. Is it right? It's working. It's working for us. It has created a lot of pain points, and it's created a lot of churn, especially in my department, because we're having to respond to those things when it breaks, when it fails, those integrations. And a lot of it comes down to us, which is okay. I mean, we're able to point them in the right direction and say, no, you need to go talk to the SAP team, or that's the GIS team or the FD, whatever. So it is, but it's also largely dependent on what you need, right? So in one thing, talking with all the other utilities here, I've noticed that everyone has very different roles. They have very different needs. So for us, our role, as Nicole mentioned, is this kind of start to finish. The ADET does everything. So we needed to find a way to do that. Choices were an all-in-one integrated package or multiple software pieces that would involve that chair swivel. And we went this way, and it's worked out all right. The one thing I'll say is it's presented a lot of problems now that we've been asked to engage with external contractors, because as we alluded to yesterday, there's issues with those e-employee numbers in SAP. We found that MuleSoft was dropping the E, MuleSoft wasn't coded to include alphanumeric, so it was straight numeric, so that had to be fixed. Things like that. There's lots of challenges, and it's the nature of the business, right? Semi-agile. So we keep responding. We have these little things come along, and we fix them. And it's been a challenge, but it's been rewarding.